Hey everybody. I have been thinking this morning. I've gotten a couple of questions over the last few days that revolved around algae eating fish and off-flux grazing fish. Now, if you follow along with my videos, you know that I always make a distinction between the two types of fish, whether it's the off-flux grazer or the algae eater. I've done a video specifically about that. I'll go ahead and attach a card right here if you want to watch that video. But what that actually got me thinking about was not so much the difference between the two, but the difference between what is referred to as an established aquarium versus what is referred to as a mature aquarium. And I had somebody the other day tell me that I shouldn't be keeping a rubber lip pleco in a 10-gallon tank because there wasn't enough natural forage to keep the fish healthy in such a small environment. It needed to have more area to, they said, eat the algae. But that, in fact, is only partially true. If I were only allowing the fish to eat what was in the tank, then yes, it would quickly run out of food in such a small environment. However, I don't ever keep any of my off-flux grazing fish or any of my algae eating fish as well without supplementing their diet with a good high quality algae wafer. But what that got me thinking about was the difference between a mature tank and an established tank, because there are very clear differences, and depending on the fish you're looking at buying, if you're looking at the care parameters on various resources that will tell you how to care for your fish, you will often see listed as, don't put them in an immature aquarium or only put them in an established aquarium or whatever. So what is actually the difference between established versus mature? Established simply means the nitrogen cycle is established, and you're not going to put them in a tank that's got nitrogen or nitrites or ammonia still developing. Your nitrogen cycle is fully complete. The tank is now established and ready to put some of the more hardy fish in it. Some of the more sensitive fish will say don't put them in an aquarium unless it's a mature aquarium. And a mature aquarium is something a little different. And I tend to think it takes about 6 months for at least a freshwater aquarium to mature. So what do I mean by mature? Well, in this tank, it's kind of tough to tell that it's mature because I have a lot of off-flux grazing fish in here. I've got Otocinclus, I've got at least one rubber lip, and a few other odds and ends here and there. And you can see everything stays nice and clean. I don't have to worry about algae control, and I don't even develop a lot of off-flux. Now, off-flux is not the same as algae. Off-flux is most directly translates to biofilm or surface growth. And it is just that. It's a combination of little bits of micro worms and crustaceans and algae and bacteria, and there's all sorts of stuff growing in it. It's a little cocktail of food for the off-flux grazing fish. This tank also has a Chinese algae eater in it, and likewise you can see, despite being years old, this tank has very little off-flux on anything. It just looks bright and shiny and clean. Even the leaves, for the most part, have been scraped clean, and that is because I have the off-flux grazing fish in here. So if you have a tank that is immature, that may very well mean that your nitrogen cycle is complete and everything is up and running, but the tank hasn't been functioning and cycling long enough that you're developing a good, healthy, what I think of as a patina of off-flux or biofilm. You'll get that growth that develops all over everything. See, this is another tank that I also have some off-flux grazing fish in here, and they just do a fantastic job of keeping your tank clean. But now let's look at this tank. This tank is getting mature, and it's now what I would say mature. I set this up around Black Friday last year, so you can think of maybe like the beginning of December. I really got this up and running. So it's been about 5 months now, and it's probably what I would say mature. This is going to be a slightly different tank than what we see now. I just wanted these fish in here for the sake of allowing it to mature over the winter. We'll talk more about that later. Hopefully this tank is going to be undergoing some changes really soon here now that the weather is changing, and I'm going to be able to get out and go fishing, and maybe the crayfish are going to start moving again here pretty soon, and I'll be able to get in here and do something with that. But in the meantime, I needed some fish in here that would act more or less as placeholders. They would just create a living tank. They would give me a bioload. They would give me waste. They would produce the nitrites and the nutrients in the tank. And the result is I've got a tank that is nice and well established. If I was to put an off-wax grazing fish in this tank, it would not starve to death, or at least not until it cleaned the tank off and then ran out of food, at which point, of course, you have to supplement their diet. So that is a mature tank versus a established tank. And mature also has to do with the water chemistry. I don't know all of the ins and outs of how a tank stabilizes over time, but it really does. When you first set up a tank, it's very common that you will get the brown algae, the brown diatom algae develops all over everything. And as time goes on, it's got something to do with the chemical reactions in the water, the way it pulls the silicates out of the water, and the added silicates allow for the diatoms to grow. And over time, that goes away. You may have to get in there and clean and wipe them down. But eventually, once your tank has stabilized, and it usually takes about 6 months, those diatoms will start going away. And just like this tank, which used to be brown and green and covered in all sorts of everything, I've sort of reached that balance where I've got some algal growth in there, but it's not growing out of control. The only real algae-eating fish I have in here, well, I do have a fair amount. I've got the two mollies are algae eaters. The tilapia down here is an algae eater. That one eats algae all the time. And then, of course, my crayfish is an algae eater. So as they go along and peck at the algae, they keep the long hair algae from getting out of control. But none of those fish are off-wax grazers. And that's why this tank has that patina of green and brown all over everything. And it makes it look like a mature tank. This is probably more what you would think of if you thought of mature tank, as opposed to tanks like this, which are much, much more mature. This tank's almost 5 years old now, and yet it looks bright and shiny and new, and that is simply because of the off-wax grazers. This tank over here has more or less just established, and I was hoping we would get to see him. That is my rubber lip pleco that I have in this tank, and I put him in only after the tank had been up and running for quite a while, and I was just developing brown algae all over everything, and I was also getting green algae starting to grow all over everything. And once I got to that point, the tank was not only established, but was reaching maturity, and I was able to put that rubber lip in there, and now look at the tank. It's not covered in brown algae or green algae or anything else, and that is all the work of that one rubber lip. But you cannot put a fish like that in an immature tank. There has to be enough biofilm in there for it to feed on, or you have to do heavy supplementation with lots and lots of either fresh vegetables or a good high quality algae wafer, something like that for them to scrape and chew on and get a lot of vegetable and fiber diet, as well as a high amount of protein. All of that comes with an established, mature tank, not simply an established tank that has the nitrogen cycle filled in. We'll have one more look at one other tank, and I'll make one final point. This is my figure 8 puffer. And a puffer is a kind of fish that is typically referred to as a scaleless fish. Loaches are also considered scaleless fish, and there's a few others. Scaleless fish are generally much more sensitive to things like chemicals and medications. So when you've got a tank that is not fully established, it will often be recommended that you don't put scaleless fish in unestablished tanks. They don't have to be mature in this case, but they have to be established, because even little nitrogen spikes or nitrite spikes or ammonia spikes will really affect a fish like this. They're very sensitive to chemicals in their water. So a fish like this, you would be told, don't put it in a tank until the tank is well established. The fish like the off-wax grazers, the rubber lips for example, that's the kind of fish that you would be told not to put it in a tank that was not fully mature. So there is a difference, and I hope that clarified it and didn't make it even more confusing. That was a little more rambly than I intended, but once I get to walking around and looking at my fish and going from tank to tank, I just kind of, get doing my thing and enjoying my fish. So there you are. So thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed. Again, I hope that clarified things for somebody. Please subscribe if you're not already. You never know what you're going to get from me, and I am working on a few things this weekend, so you don't want to miss any of that. So thanks again for watching. See you real soon in the next one.